Good afternoon to UK column viewers and listeners, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to part two of my interview with Karl Schwarz on the subject of the events of 9/11 and what was happening in a geopolitical sense around that. Oil and gas exploration, but also we have been talking about risks around the World Trade Center buildings themselves, in particular in connection with asbestos. So we move on through what's really a chronology leading up to the World Trade Center events and post. But one of the issues that you'd focused in on, Karl, was the security company. And I found this very interesting. We've got a company called Securacom Incorporated versus Securacom Consulting Incorporated. And the difference with Securacom Consulting is com has got two M's. What was happening around this court case? What was this battle about?
The best I can tell, once I got the full chronology ironed out on who Stratosec is, we had, I think they were using Securacom so nobody would know the name Stratosec. And they kept it tied up for as long as they could. They actually did their IPO in 1997, but they were still appealing and tied this other company up all the way to 2000. It was like they did not want anybody to know. Oh, by the way, the real security company for the World Trade Center is Stratosec. And they're registered in 16 different states, and it's where they're registered, and a lot of those registrations also point straight back at 9/11.
We've got a bona fide security company that's started from quite small beginnings. It's established itself with a pretty sizable business in the States. And then along comes another company that chooses a name that's very close to it. And that second company is the company that's then ultimately involved in security around the World Trade Center. Is that the nub of it?
Yes. But if you dig deeper on Stratosec, they actually predate by years. Even in New Jersey, even in New York, they predate their use of the name Securacom by years. So it smelled to me like this was a cutout, and that they didn't want anybody knowing that Stratosec was actually the security company.
And the reason that you and your team believe this is so significant is ultimately when the events around 9/11 took place, who had access to the building was a critical factor in what actually took place.
Exactly. And there were several players involved in that. One, there was Stratosec. And then Otis Elevators lost the elevator contract for maintenance and service on the World Trade Center towers. And in comes a company, Ace Elevator, which was basically a nobody. And this was during the period of time that everybody on my team thinks is when they were actually wiring the building to bring it down by controlled demolition. Now, this was not just done by bombs. The interior core that I mentioned earlier, part one, was one of the strongest structures ever built. And you've seen H-shaped columns. It's got a top and a bottom, and then it's got a vertical member between them. A lot of these columns were not your regular steel, which was called ASTM 36, which means 36,000 pounds per square inch capacity. A lot of the steel was 50, 60, and 70, and even between the top and bottom, running parallel with what they call the web, were huge plates of steel welded in there, where it's like a steel box. It was almost like a trunk of a tree. It was just shy of being solid steel, and you couldn't take that out with a regular bomb. You had to figure out some way to weaken the steel to where then the bomb could pierce through it. And Stratosec was involved in that in the Los Alamos National Laboratory out in New Mexico. And then I started digging into who are these names of these people, and how likely is it that George Bush's brother is part of Stratosec, and he's also part of an insurance company that took a 30 million loss on World Trade Center when it came down. It's been my contention that the Bush family knew about that asbestos lawsuit sometime in the 90s.
You mentioned a laboratory there in connection with the security company, if I read that correctly. What was happening in the laboratory? What were they testing?
They were that particular lab, Los Alamos National Lab, was heavily involved in thermitic research. Now, thermitic reactions have been around ever since they've been separating gold and silver and copper. They can work really fast, or they can be designed to work really slow. And what you do is once you get that ignited, if it's a slow process, have the plane slam into the towers, the thermitic process kicks in, and then, oh my God, the towers collapsed when the bombs started going off because they could pierce the steel because it had been weakened. And there's a video on the internet. Molten metal was flowing out of one of the towers. And when they were doing the cleanup, they found pools of molten metal. There was nothing about the jet fuel fires or the normal fires that was hot enough to turn that type of steel to a pool of steel, completely melted.
We have the irrefutable statistic that no steel-framed building anywhere in the world had collapsed as simply as a result of a carbonaceous wood or a fuel-based fire.
Well, there was never, I kind of jokingly say sometimes, are the building codes that lax in New York City? That the only 3 that have ever collapsed anywhere in the world is a high-rise fire, just happened to be right there on the same site. That to me is a smoking gun.
Okay, so if we focus in on the events of the day a bit more, and I've got a number of your images, and there's a little bit of animation here as well. And this, of course, was something that a lot of people saw. I think this is the one that plays. So we've got one of the towers already hit, and then we see an aircraft fly into the side of the other tower. When you see this clip, what's the significance of it, Karl?
Most of the pictures that were shown on TV and videos that popped up later were much further away than this guy was. This was a Canadian banker. He worked in Toronto. He was in New York City. He was, I think he worked in compliance operations. And he just happened to be walking to work. And he was standing there, videoing the North Tower. That's Rector Place on the left, and that's the Marriott downtown on the right. So we could figure out within feet of where he was standing, once we kind of matched up the screen view that he had on his camcorder. We had copies of that video that you're playing. And what we did is we put it on a large screen, analyzed it, and then we did still frames that were less than 1/10 of a second each. We have 20 still frames. That's a 737. That is not a Boeing 767 from Boston Logan International Airport.
I've got one of those stills that you labelled, and this is Exhibit A that's gone in with the court submission. And there's also one where there's a zoom in on it, and you're suggesting here that this isn't even that this is a manipulated image.
That's like a CGI insert. That is not the plane that flew almost over the head of that Canadian banker. And he got it on the camcorder.
This one here is the genuine image. Is that correct?
Yeah. There's a big mystery about what happened to these planes. And I actually had a phone call one time. It was made to me by a woman. She was involved in air traffic control operations in Boston. And after my book came out, after I was at Jimmy Walters' thing, she called me up from her sister's home phone number, not her own phone. Told me, she just told me her first name, Brenda. And she was in the air traffic control when those two planes took off. They didn't come to New York City. They went to Europe. And I thought that was really odd. I mean, I used to fly a lot of miles when I was with Smith Barney and when my design build company was doing work in multiple states. I had never been on a 767 in a continental flight within domestic flight within the U.S. 767 is a much longer range plane. And what she told me, she said those planes turned, they took off, they turned back to the east, and they went towards Europe.
I've got to call it an anecdotal story, but that lady called you and spoke to you.
She was scared because they had been threatened to not talk about it, to not disclose it, blah, blah, blah. And then when this video was in my possession, I was robbed by the CIA in Berlin. They stole that video. And about 11 months later, the other video that my team had, that woman was found murdered in her home. The video and the stills were gone. And there was still money in her purse.
Okay. And the banker, the original man, I think he was a compliance officer for Canada Bank, took the original video. Is he still alive?
Well, he just up and disappeared. After I was robbed, Deborah was trying to find out some way to track him down to get another copy to me. And then she wound up dead 11 months later. And we haven't been able to find him.
Right.
I called the bank and they said, well, he didn't come to work one day and we don't know where he went. He may have gone into hiding in the Rockies or something.
The critical video clip was posted relatively recently. It suddenly appeared online again, and you actually don't know who could have released that video clip.
Well, it wasn't Deborah and it wasn't me. So maybe the banker's still out there, or maybe another person had that video. But that video that you just played, that was not on the internet like a year and a half ago.
So we've got really disturbing things happening around real video footage that was taken at the time, which of course would be key evidence. And then we've got the fact that it was claimed that the plane was a Boeing 767, but you are saying it was probably a 737. And we'll have a look at that in a minute.
Yeah, one of the things that we did, we figured out within 2 or 3 feet of where he was standing. And with trigonometry on one of the still frames that I have, we were able to figure out the wingspan, approximate wingspan of that jet that flew over. And the wingspan of a 767 is 75% of the width of the face of that building. And the wingspan of a 737 is just a little over 50%. So there's a big difference in wingspan and body width, and even the size of the engines. We've already done that math. So that's not a 767. That's a 737 that went over his shoulder.
The one that you're saying is the CGI, and this was an image created presumably in order to reinforce the idea that it was a Boeing 767, the bigger aircraft.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that photo is not what went over his shoulder. Different colored plane and everything.
More evidence that you've looked at is actually debris itself, and in particular engine components, some of which appeared actually on the street. So tell us about this one, a combustion chamber.
That's a combustion chamber of a 737. You can verify that in multiple ways. I've shown that to some people that actually work on 737, so they recognize what they're looking at.
And of course, the scale of that piece of engine in the image is pretty simple to ascertain, because not only can you get a some idea from the street furniture close to it, but you've also got a person standing in the foreground and you've got two people crossing in the background, and you can see that that is waist height at best. So this is a very small unit.
Yeah, that's the type of jet that they use, jet engine they use on 737s. And even prior to that, there was a couple of jet models that had those same engines on.
This is another image that you'd given us, well, your Exhibit B. In this case, we've got a 737 jet engine and relative in size to a human being adjacent to it. So we've got two men, or a lady could be one of them, using a phone in the background. So still quite a big engine. But if I go to this one, which is the 767 jet engine, the audience can see that there is a huge difference in size compared to the man who's working in the foreground. And therefore, the wing that takes this engine would be vastly bigger than for the 737.
That's true. That engine weighs many times more than 737 engines.
And then if we turn our attention to the Pentagon, this is an image of some form of glass. We would call it a windscreen or windshield, I think it's called in the States, on the Pentagon lawn. And you've made the comment that there were no vehicles involved in the impact or in the vicinity of the impact. And you're saying it's not a window of a Boeing 757.
Yeah, that photograph was sent to me the next day. I woke up early the next morning, and I knew some people in the Pentagon. They sent that to me asking if I could identify that. Just to give you a kind of a marker, I'm about 20 years older than the person that sent me that. Now a retired lieutenant colonel, U.S. Air Force intelligence. And the intel people, they're not out on the flight lines and the operations. And they didn't even have a clue what that came from. They wanted to know if I'd ever seen it. And I told them, I said, I got a pretty good idea. And I dug in deep. And yeah, that's a canopy window from an A3 Skyward, which is it's a Cold War jet. It was mostly used in the Navy. It had fold-up wings where you could actually launch it, off of an aircraft carrier or from land base. And it is used for electronic intelligence. It's used for electronic jamming. It's used for recon, but it can also carry a nuke. And that's one of the reasons the windows were so thick on it, because it was potentially it was going to be going into the Russian airspace, if the war broke out.
This was the glass, obviously reinforced glass, because although it's heavily fractured, it's held together, but it's on the lawn. And you've also got an image here of what was being claimed as part of a 757 wing, but you're making the statement this is clearly not part of a wing that any 757 has had. And I'll follow on with this image where men are carrying something away, which is covered up, which is very interesting. And your comment is not a severed wing from a 757 that many men could pick up, i.e. the real wing would be far too heavy, but also the angles and the width of what's covered up with the blue tarp are not close to a 757 wing. So there's debris on the ground, but your point is that this debris does not match up with the claims that the aircraft that hit the Pentagon was a 757.
True, absolutely. That's. I was actually the first person to break that story, and was heavily criticized. But several years later, several other people verified it. They went through all the evidence and pieces at the Pentagon, and they came to the same conclusion. This was not a 757, and it was probably an A3 Skyward.
Okay. And you're reinforcing things here. So you've got a cover of a magazine, which is saying, is this really a 757 engine disc? either RB211 or Honeywell APU, or is it instead from the engine of a smaller plane or missile? And that appears to be the front cover of a booklet called wagkingdom.com. And then the right is a turbine, a Prax Air, which is a company that refurbished military jet engine blades. And you're saying that the one on the right does seem to fit the right dimensions for the debris on the Pentagon lawn.
Exactly. If you take off the hub cap from the left photo, and then you look at the one that's been renovated in Prax Air, you can see it's exactly the same center, way that the turbine blades are attached to it.
To put it in context, under your Exhibit D, here's the A3 Skywarrior aircraft that would be fitted with such engines. And you've made the comment here that the Pentagon had two left as of 9/11/2001. This jet uses the exact type of fan and rotor hub. When you say the Pentagon had two left, why would the Pentagon itself have aircraft such as these?
Well, actually, it was the service, whether it was Navy or Air Force, they still had two A3 Skywarriors in their inventory. And I had people inside the Pentagon verify that for me. They had sold most of their fleet to Raytheon, which is the photograph of that jet right there. They use those for their testing of missiles and, electronic countermeasure systems, all kinds of different things they do for the U.S. government.
And then we've got a close-up here to give us a better idea of scale, not only in respect to the engines, but here you're actually starting to focus in on that broken windshield on the ground and saying here it's a similar make and of material and size as found on the Pentagon lawn. And if I just go to the next one, and then I'll let you come back into comment. So here we've got a nose cone section of the same aircraft, and there you can see the shape of that windshield glass. And it certainly does, to me, seem to be roughly the same shape as the shape of the broken windshield on the Pentagon lawn.
Yeah, most military jets don't have canopy windows like that. They're small. It's either a unitized, one canopy piece, or it's two pieces. But that was the only jet I've ever seen anywhere that actually had those two that were above the pilot and co-pilot.
Where has this evidence, this photographic evidence, where has this appeared? You've now got it into your lawsuit documentation, but where has it come to light elsewhere?
I have put that in an article that I wrote about the A3 Skywarrior. I revealed that, yes, we have a photograph of that canopy window. I was doing my own critique of the official story because I knew the official story was basically just a big lie.
Thank you for that, Karl. And this one, which I just find fascinating. So you have here a photograph, which you said is a photo taken inside one of the World Trade Center towers. And then you can see on the big cardboard boxes that are stacked up, it says BB-18. And you've commented that the boxes are devices used in controlled demolitions. This is a very critical photograph. What's the provenance of it, though? How do we know that this is a bona fide photograph from inside the World Trade Center?
Well, I can tell it's inside the World Trade Center several different ways, but just the width of the windows and the other span, the vertical elements. Of course, with the guy looking away from us, what he's doing is he's attaching the cable to what is called a fuse holder. It's the fuse holder that they have to put in to test the sequence. When you're bringing a building down with controlled demolition, all the bombs don't go off at the same time. You have to gut it, so to speak, in the center, and then the others start falling to the center to bring it all down within its footprint. You don't want a 110-story building falling like a tree, or a 47-story building like World Trade Center 7. It has to be broken up internally and down. But what he's doing there after they do the wiring and the testing of the sequence, then they set the explosives are already set, but they don't have the firing mechanism, to detonate them, which is basically an electric charge. And then when they actually do it with the laptop, boom, 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 the whole sequence is done. But we had questions of who that person is doing that. And I sent this to a remote viewing team. We're talking somebody who's military, police, law enforcement, and also intelligence agency level team. And they're 95% certain that guy was the chief operating officer of the World Trade Center security company, Dissect.
I have to ask a question here, and maybe this is a very naive question to ask. How would it be possible to engage an American in such vicious criminal activity to bring down a major building with the resultant thousands of deaths? Why would an American do that? Would they be prepared to do it simply because they were offered a lot of money? There's an expression in UK which is an ordinary decent criminal, and it means a criminal that is still a criminal, but they actually have some other values. They still respect certain values. And I could think that a lot of people who might be criminal in lots of things they do would balk at the attempt of doing such a heinous crime on behalf of the government.
The guy that was the chief operating officer of Stratosec, his previous background, he was at Fort Monmouth military base. It's called AMC, and he is a weapons and explosives expert. They do a lot of distribution of weapons from there, and also Charleston, South Carolina. He's got a military background, and I guess if you offered him enough money and security, you won't get caught type stuff, he may have decided to go ahead and take it.
Let's put the photograph of those boxes back on screen, because you'd also put some text alongside it, which I'll just read for the audience. It will be sufficient to say here that no tall structural steel building has ever suffered global collapse, complete collapse, either before or after 9/11 for any reason other than controlled demolition. On 9/11, the official account says that there were 3 such instances, that is, of complete collapse, due to minor low heat fires, all on the same day and in the same place. This is a very suspicious record that cannot be ignored when looking at all of the other factors. And then the statement goes on to say the photo is inside a World Trade Center tower. The cardboard boxes, BB-18, are devices used in controlled demolitions. This is absolutely a fundamental thing. The strength of the World Trade Center buildings by virtue of their construction, and I will insert an image so that viewers can actually see what it looks like if you cut horizontally across the buildings to see what that steel core is. And you've already described that was a massive central steel framework, and it was of steel that had superior heat resistance to normal steels. But in any case, the heat from jet fuel burning in normal open air conditions cannot generate the heat necessary to melt or even greatly soften steel. And yet in this case, we have the steel simply vaporizing or becoming molten and the buildings falling in their own footprint. It is a remarkable situation.
Yeah, let me say something about the photograph of the guy with the BB-18 boxes. We have another photograph that was taken inside the World Trade Center, and it's taken at a different angle. And you've got 2 young males looking out and down. And you can tell that this was taken somewhere like the 60th, 70th, maybe the 80th floor of World Trade Center. Same boxes.
And of course, those boxes could only come in if security for the World Trade Center had been heavily compromised, or the security company or personnel were complicit in allowing this to happen.
Yes, exactly. And I'm saying complicit. The only way that you could have gotten to the interior core is through this massive structure is through the elevators and certain crawl spaces that see, not all the elevators went all the way up, but you have to get back in there and wire it and even put the thermite, like a thermite plate on both sides of it. When that ignites, that will immediately start degrading the strength of that steel. And that's what they were doing at Los Alamos, thermitic research. Now, I always thought thermitic reactions were very fast. I have a video of a German that their company was one of them that invented thermitic processes, and they were demonstrating the fast and the slow version. So yes, there's a way to do it slow.
Karl, let's bring things together here a bit, because you were present when the initial inquiry was going on around World Trade Center and the events. What was your take on how investigations were conducted?
I was already aware that there were some huge conflicts, like the chairman, Thomas Keene. He's involved. He was the CEO of Amaretta Hess Oil Company, but Amaretta Hess was already in a joint venture with Delta Oil, which is Saudi, over in the Caspian. They have a big oil lease that's just off the coast of Azerbaijan and just north of Iran. And then Mayor Brown, Richard Ben Benist, they were the ones that were representing Turkmenistan down in Texas. They represented them at the Fifth Circuit, and they even filed a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court, which was rejected in March 2004. So you had conflicts sitting right there on that commission that had no reason to look for the truth.
If you sum up your opinion of those inquiries for us, how would you describe them?
I agree with the 6 of the 10 commissioners that said that it was set up to fail.
Set up to fail. That expression also suggests mens rea, that there was a guilty mind, there was a plan at work. It wasn't as if it was set up and then it proved to be incompetent. You're suggesting that it was deliberately set up in order to produce an answer, an evaluation on the day that was not true.
John Farmer, he used to be the Attorney General of New Jersey. He was also on the staff of Christine Todd Whitman, former EPA administrator, as a legal counsel to her office. But he was one of the general counsels for the 9/11 Commission. And he went public after it was all over, and he said basically the United States government decided not to tell the truth of what really happened.
And as you've made clear in the way that you've set out the legal application with the plaintiffs, this act of not telling the truth, which is a very polite way of saying that the public are being lied to, had huge implications on what took place in other parts of the world. And thousands, if not millions, of people died as a result of these actions that took place around the World Trade Center.
Yeah, it all started there, and then I've seen figures that between Afghanistan and Iraq to version 2.0, there's over 2 million dead.
2 million.
And yeah, over 2 million dead.
Yeah. When you look at that BBC children's documentary, which was in part 1, and say to our audience, if you haven't seen that part 1, you need to see it, because this is a bit of a more relaxed discussion on what took place. But when you see that BBC report to children, what goes through your head?
They're trying to teach people not to think and not to ask questions. Just buy off what we told you. If we told you the truth, just believe it. But where I'm from, Brian, we have a saying: "I was born, but not yesterday." And when I started seeing what was going on before 9/11, that day, and after 9/11, it made perfect sense to me of why they did it and what they were really after. And that 240-page document I sent you, that was the one I prepared for our attorneys. Every bit of the facts are in there. And like in Florida, Stratasec, we couldn't find a foreign corporation registration in Florida for Stratasec, even though we knew there was one. We actually found that yes, there was a business relationship with two companies down there in SEC files, a mandatory, public company SEC filing. So it's taken a lot of research to get to the bottom of it.
We've got three things at work. We've got asbestos, an asbestos risk in the building, which was a multi-billion pound problem. We've got very strange circumstances with a security company around the building. And then we've got I believe the figure you gave me originally was a 7.4 trillion value on that oil pipeline deal.
Well, that was as of 2004. So,
that's a very good point. So, yeah, 7 trillion as of 2004. So a huge, absolutely huge oil and gas opportunity. The US companies had been outmaneuvered by that Argentinian company, and it was clear that the US companies and the government wanted that pipeline deal, but they could only get it if they had control of Afghanistan. And how do you get control of Afghanistan and the region? You've got to get troops on the ground, and you need an excuse to get those troops on the ground. And you would argue, hence 9/11.
Pearl Harbor. I'll just give you an aside. There are still groups trying to sue the Saudis. And I saw this woman, she lives in Florida. Her husband died. He worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. And they're still after the Saudis. And I've been trying to get her to accept this simple reality that the Saudis were business partners with these people. They were not going to lose that by attacking America. And when we found that there was Kuwait American Corporation involved with the Bush family, involved with Stratasec, involved in the Securicom versus Securicom lawsuit, that tells me that don't look at the Saudis. Look at who was actually hands-on. And in that one photo where you're showing the guy with the BB-18 boxes, I think that's Mashawi Sabah that's sitting down in the business suit. There's three men in that photo. I think this Kuwaiti guy is sitting in that chair.
Yes, you've got the man in the slightly pinkish top who's working. He's clearly a workman. And then behind him, just behind his hands in this image, is a man sat in a dark suit with his back towards us. And you think that that figure may be who?
I think that's Mashawi Sabah of Kuwait American Corporation, which was in bed with Marvin Bush and Wirt D. Walker III, who's also a Bush cousin, and other people that were directly involved in the security of World Trade Center.
Now, obviously, we can't see that man's face, but you make that allegation because of all the other information around it.
It's just a gut reaction I have every time I look at that photo.
Tell us a bit about the team that's, if you can, that's come around you to support what you've done here with assembling such a vast amount of evidence over so many years and moving it through with the court case. If you can't give us names, can you tell us anything about the types of people that have come around to support you?
Some of them have been engineers, scientists, technicians, very smart people. I had to get out of the 9/11 truth movement. for the simple reason I was the only Republican involved in it. And when you've got a bunch of liberals who are involved in it because they want to get rid of Bush Cheney, and then all of a sudden a Republican shows up and has more information than they have, they tried to turn it around and make the whole story about me. It's like they totally lost focus. But I pulled out a 9/11 truth because I could see it wasn't going anywhere.
So you've got professional people who've come around you. Have you had? I've done 3 interviews with CIA professionals who have grave concerns about the performance and the reliability and the trustworthiness of American intelligence and security, national security. Have you had anybody of that ilk that's come on board to support, who's got inside knowledge of the government, the inner workings of the US government itself?
Not yet, but it's like I told you before we started. Last night, I got emails from 3 former CIA people that want this video. So most of the people have been like pilots, architect engineers, mechanics that work on jets, verifying the little pieces of the components and everything. They haven't been the government level stuff. It's been the people that are practical frontline people that they're in aerospace. They actually work on the jets. Yes, they know what a Boeing 737 combustion chamber looks like and how big it is, and they do the same on the 767. I mean, even the type of combustion chamber that's on the 757 is considerably bigger than what you were showing for the 737. It's a different type of jet engine. It's called a high bypass fan, and it's not like a turbojet where the air comes in and it gets supercharged and blows out the back through combustion. On a high bypass fan, your fan blades are huge, and what you're doing is you're grabbing more air, pushing it.
Karl, you've now submitted the legal documentation where that application's been made to the court. But as I understand it, the information that's gone in has got to be reworked in order to get it in a proper legal format and with the correct legal language, and presumably charges formed around the evidence that your team has put together. Can you tell us a bit more about the process of getting it into the legal system? Who's actually accepted these papers?
I've had attorneys review them, and no one attorney can take these people on. I mean, it's going to have a big back office, maybe 2 or 3 law firms, representing the plaintiffs, because we're going to be up against quite a few big law firms. It'll turn into what we call a paper blizzard real quick. Okay, there'll be all kinds of motions, counter motions, motions for summary judgment. So he's going to have to review it and understand the reason that the lawsuit is RICO, civil RICO, vicar, abuse of human rights under color of law, all the way up to murder and treason. And there's 2 laws. It's common in UK and it's common in US law. It's called misprision of felony and misprision of treason. If you're aware of something, you don't report it, and it comes out later, you could be charged.
We spoke quite a while ago, and at that stage, President Trump hadn't come into office. How do you view the fact that Trump's now in as President of the United States? Do you think that his offices are going to be more receptive to taking this type of case forward?
He has always wanted the truth about 9/11 on the record. A lot of people don't know that they had a hard time coming up with enough manpower and machines for the cleanup crews. And Donald Trump hired out of his own pocket additional people to come in and help. So he was concerned about what happened. I think he'd be supportive of the truth actually finally being on.
Can you say at the moment that this legal application has been accepted by the Department of Justice?
No, we haven't gone that step. The approach we're taking would actually be filed in a U.S. District Court. It wouldn't be filed through the DOJ. DOJ is more of a law enforcement arm of the U.S. government, and it's basically for federal laws. But this one violates a lot of federal laws and state laws too. One interesting thing, after 9/11 happened, I contacted Arlington County, Virginia, and I contacted the prosecuting attorney in Manhattan. They both have been ordered to stand down and not pursue murder investigations in their own jurisdiction. And it was absolutely their jurisdiction, but they were ordered. Oh no, this was an act of war against America. So we don't, you can't investigate this. This is our case.
By putting this claim into the district court in New York and New Jersey area, apart from anything else, this is where the raw emotion of what happened resides, isn't it? Because the events took place there.
Yeah, what we may wind up doing, and I've had this discussion with the attorney too, the courts in New York are very liberal. They tend to try to make up the law as they go. And the other possibility would be filing this in the state of Virginia, because Arlington County, Virginia, there were murders there too. Okay, because I'm not sure that anybody would get a fair trial in the city on something of this magnitude. There's too many ways the mafia, corruption, and stuff like that could try to twist this and get it kicked out on technicality.
What sort of reaction have you had from the media in what you're doing? Because you've been very outspoken. Your book went out there. You did the very high-profile interviews. Did you get any response from the big media channels in the US or from anywhere else?
You mean like CBS, NBC, ABC? No. They're pretty much under control of the CIA, and if they're told to not touch a story, they don't touch it.
Well, at the end of the day, Karl, it's one of the reasons that the UK column exists, because we got tired of the fact that the truth didn't come out in the big media channels. And of course, if you live in UK, you have this multi-billion pound organisation called the BBC, which simply works alongside and for the government. There's no question this is true. And I've not seen any substantial investigation by the BBC into what took place at 9/11. And we have the incident of building number 7. Would you like to remind the audience about that?
At about 5 p.m. on September 11, 2001, the BBC, a woman reporter, looks at something and she looks at this camera and she goes, "We've just been informed that the Salomon building has collapsed." And literally over her left shoulder in the background, looking out across Manhattan, WTC 7 is still standing. About 20 minutes later, it was brought down by a controlled demolition. And even Larry Silverstein admitted after 9/11 that he gave the order to pull it. Well, pull it is a controlled demolition term. That's a warning sign that in 10 minutes this building's coming down, so everybody get away.
He, of course, was trying to sell it that in order to protect the public, a decision had been made to collapse the building. But it also collapsed by falling in on itself, and you can see that very clearly in that footage.
Well, if you look at the World Trade Center, there was some spewing outwards, which was basically from the core out. The core itself collapsed into its own footprint. That's why we knew there was no way that low heat fires could have done that. Some other way had to be brought into bear to have brought that interior core down.
And the last point, from me, Karl, is you have an audience today. What would you like to say to the audience? What would you like them to be thinking about and doing in relation to 9/11?
Several things. We had discussed in the past by email. Can you put my email address posted with this article, with
Of
this
course.
video?
Of course.
One of the things we've run into is the United States government plays real dirty. They have tried to make sure we couldn't get any traction to come at them. They know what we know. Like at the third anniversary event, Jimmy Walter's event, September 11, 2004, CIA shows up and they threatened me backstage. They thought I was going to disclose the asbestos lawsuit because I had requested a copy of the final order of the asbestos lawsuit. And I just looked at him and I said, well, gentlemen, I came here to say what I have to say. So why don't you go with these two security guards since you cannot legally be back here and you can just listen to what I got to say. As you know from the PowerPoint that you were showing some of the slides, I was revealing the Caspian Basin issues. There were other people on those 4 panels that were talking about this, the asbestos, and there were other people talking about the. I don't know why they targeted me, but I thought it was really stupid for them to, threaten me because they were afraid I was going to be the one to out it. Now, one of the things I wish the entire world had seen Jimmy Walter's DVD on that. Then they'd be wide awake. But I think what needs to happen, we're going to have to pull together a support group, even financially, because every which way I've turned, including this year, Brian, I had a guy coming to Canada. I didn't get back to Europe until the 18th of January. And he was literally disappeared. First, he was kidnapped, catching a plane to come to Ontario. That right there set me back $5 million and over $60 million. That one step. It took the police about 5 or 6 hours to find him. By the time they found him, he had missed his 5:10 a.m. flight. So we tried to route him a different way, and we haven't seen or heard from this key person since January 7th, 3 p.m. his time, and it was 6 a.m. my time in Ontario. That's why I came back to Europe. I mean, I just got completely leveled over there. Years worth of work for naught. This is how the U.S. government works with people. They spy on you, they get out ahead of you, and they hammer you to keep you from moving forward. Now, what you've just presented to me here is major evidence and can move forward as soon as we can find the means to do that.
Karl, I'm going to say, I think we're at the end of this. There's so much more to tell, and this 2-part interview is a tiny proportion of the work that you've been doing. But thank you very, very much for joining me. And I'm just so pleased that you also were watching that interview with Mr. Sweeney when the issue of Sandy Berger came up, and that triggers you to make contact. That was really excellent. So thank you very much for doing that.
I was surprised when I first went to your site that you had interviewed Waller and him. And I know from arm's length, I know who both of these people are, but I never watched a video with them. I've read articles where people were talking about them.
I found the interviews with them very, very interesting. Because one of the points that we discussed is if these things were happening in the States, they're also, i.e. the breakdown of law and order within the security services, if that's happened within the services in the US, it's also certainly happened in the UK. In fact, a little while ago, the government was busy introducing a law which made it easier for the intelligence and security services to break the law when they felt it was appropriate to do so. So if the law is to make the law, if the law is to break the law, you have no law.
That's true. In America, they have the Smith-Mundt Act, which forbid propaganda and lying to Americans. But then in 2012, Obama had been, they did the Smith Modernization Act, which legalized lying to Americans.
Just a coincidence, Karl. Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. But anyway, make sure that my email gets in there. People are welcome to contact me if they want to. And we're having to pull together a war chest here to take these people on and take them down. The evidence is, well, I've got a lot more photos than you have shown here today. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. I just selected some of them to stick in there. We could discuss it today.
Karl, let's end there. Thank you very, very much for joining me. It's been a fascinating discussion, and we need to get the truth out, and we need to get the bad people brought to rights. That's the aim of the game.
Well, thank you for having me. One of the things that's going to happen as soon as I have the links is this is going out to close to 30 million people. And I'm hoping you get a lot more followers and viewers and supporters because you're doing great work over there.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it there and hope to see you again with UK Column. Thank you very much, Karl Schwarz.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.